Now to one of our top stories this morning. It's tonight's release of a year-long investigation into the Old Saybrook Police Department. The findings show officers left at a high rate because of a, quote, unpleasant work environment.
And tonight, the findings of that report will be laid out at a public meeting. Channel 3's Matt McFarland is your reporter at the Old Saybrook Town Hall this morning with the details. Matt, what are we expecting?
Hi there, Kaylin and Tracy. Well, last year, the town overwhelmingly voted to use taxpayer money to fund this independent investigation. And tonight, well, they're finally going to get their answers. Since 2009, when current Old Saybrook Police Chief Michael Spira took over the department, around 54 staffers have either resigned, retired, or have been terminated. And it's why over the last year, investigators with the Police Executive Research Forum, also known as PERF, interviewed more than 70 people wanting to know why are so many officers leaving. Spira expressed concerns telling the town officers leave for better pay and benefits. But according to PERF, the money isn't why most officers say they leave. Instead, it's because of an unpleasant work environment. In interview after interview, employees described an unhealthy work environment filled with stress and paranoia. Investigators say officers complained of excessive overtime, double standards for officers and leaders, as well as fear of retaliation. The report includes 31 recommendations for improvements. And Old Saybrook's first selectman says the police commission, which oversees the police department, will look at all of them.
This is a report that was overwhelmingly supported by the public, and rather than now operate by rumor or innuendo, our residents are now fully informed of recommendations from an independent consultant that they feel will be helpful to our police department.
And coming up at 6:30, more on the investigation along with the chief's reaction to the report. Your reporter live in Old Saybrook, Matt McFarland, Channel 3 Eyewitness News.
All right, Matt has that heavy Channel 3 winter coat on and right